I want to say good evening. I'm happy to be here from the great city of Waterloo, France. My wife and I went to France the 4th of August and spent 10 days over there. Our daughter lives in Denmark, but she was visiting down in France, so we were down there, and Kevin had asked me, I want to say about 3 or 4 months ago, that he'd like to have me come up and speak, and I said that won't be any problem. Of course, I didn't have my airline reservation at that time, but anyway, about a week ago, it started to bother me. I said, so I got a hold of Kevin, and I said, when is that that evening that we're going to get together and I'm going to do a little talking? And he said, that's the 15th of August. And I said, uh-oh, I may not be home in time for that, you know. And he said, well, see what you can do. Yesterday morning we got up at 3:30, went to the airport, caught a plane in Toulouse, France, and flew up to Amsterdam, and we caught a plane in Amsterdam and flew to Chicago. My daughter picked us up. We spent about an hour there, got in the car, drove home, and got into Waterloo about 9 o'clock in the evening. So it was a long day, especially when you figure you lose 7 hours. But anyway, good evening. Glad to be here. You know, at any time during this little presentation, if you feel more comfortable booing, go right ahead. And it's not something that really bothers us, because all it is recognition. I've never walked on a baseball field that they didn't announce the umpires and everybody booed. And all they're saying is that we know you're there. I hope. I think that's what they were saying. But grew up in Cedar Falls, and contrary to many of the American League fans, and probably everybody from St. Louis that's a baseball fan would believe that I didn't have parents, but I did. And they were married. Gotta think about that a little bit. I was in the Army. I got drafted. As a matter of fact, I had transferred to colleges. I was at Wartburg, and I was dating a girl at UNI. At that time, Iowa State Teachers College, and so I decided to transfer to UNI, and they told me I had to wait a semester before I could get into classes, and I said that won't be a problem. So I got a job, and I got a letter from Uncle Sam that said he wanted me to spend 2 years in the Army. Well, that kind of caught me by surprise, and I really hadn't planned on that, but I didn't have much choice, so I went into the Army in 1957, and they sent me to Fort Dix, and they always said, well, don't volunteer. Whatever you do, when you go in the Army, don't volunteer anything. So they came in and said, did anybody have any college math? And I said, yeah, I did. I said, why? I said, well, would you like to get into the missile program? I said, sure, that's better than carrying an M1. So I got in the missile program, and they sent us out to Fort Dix, and they let us take a radio part, put it back together, and they said, now you're all set to go out on a Nike site somewhere. And I was either going to Redstone Arsenal or White Sands Missile Range, and I ended up at White Sands Missile Range. And I'm going to give you all this information because it kind of builds up to how I ever got into umpiring. So I'm in White Sands waiting for an assignment, and a captain comes in and says, does anybody know anything about baseball? And I raised my hand. I said, sure, what do you want to know? He said, well, I'm looking for a coach and 4 assistants to come to Saturday's workout at the ball field, and we need someone to pick out a team that will play in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And then, of course, all the other kids on the post would play in a league there on the post. And I said, sure, I'll do that. So I got the team. We went through about 300 kids to pick 25. Now, I know you coaches would love to have those kind of odds. But we had that, and we picked 25. We went into Las Cruces, and we just kicked butt. I mean, we just mowed them down, and that was the first time that White Sands had ever won in that league. So it was a big deal. They had a big banquet, and everybody was there. The general was there. And during the course of the evening, in the celebration, the general came to me and he said, "Wouldn't you rather be in the gym than out on that Nike site?" And I said, "Sure I would." So anyway, I end up in the gym and started programs, a wrestling program, volleyball program. I think we had 6 different programs, and I was the only one in the gym. There wasn't anybody else there. So then they transferred this master sergeant in, and he was 23-year veteran in the Army, and he was an umpire. And our desks were about from that table to this podium, and all day long, all he wanted to talk about was umpiring. And I said, you know, why would anybody want to be an umpire? And he said, well, you know, some people make a living doing that. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, no. He said, you get in the minor leagues and they pay you to do that, and then if you're fortunate enough, you get to the big leagues. I said, well, that's not where I'm going. I'm going back to college to get my degree and maybe do some coaching or what have you. And so I got out of the military in 1959. I was in Miami, and I had a friend down there that I was staying with, and she woke up one morning and left a note on my pillow, said that she was leaving and wasn't coming back. I should have known right then that I was going to be an umpire, but I didn't. So there I was in Miami. I didn't have enough money to go home for Christmas, so I thought, well, why don't I just drive up to that umpire school in Daytona Beach, Florida. And I went up there and walked in, and they looked at me and they said, can I help you? And I said, yeah, well, I hope you can help me. I said, I'm coming up here to check out this umpire school. And he said, well, it's my school. And he said, you're perfect, you can't miss. And that bothered me a little bit, because he didn't even know who it was, you know. But anyway, I did enroll, and I was fortunate to come out of that class of 1960. There were 85 of us, and I came out as their #1 student. And it didn't really say that I was any good because I hadn't done anything yet. And what they did for 6 weeks was teach us a professional method of officiating. And so I got a job in the minor leagues. My first assignment was the Alabama-Florida League. I had never been to Alabama, or, well, I'd been to Florida, obviously, but not to Alabama. But there were 2 umpires for every game. You didn't know who you were going to work with. One of you had to have a car, and if you drove a car, they gave you $100 a month, and that was going to pay for your gas also. You had to share a motel room. I mean, it wasn't very pleasant, believe me. But I figured, well, it's 1 year, I'll do the best I can. One evening I came out to go to work, and I was waiting on my partner, and the Greyhound bus was going by, and I looked at the window, and my partner was in the Greyhound bus. He was getting the hell out of Dodge. So anyway, I put 9 years in the minor leagues. I put a year in the Alabama-Florida League, 2 years in the Northwest League up in Washington, Idaho. And then I was bought by the Texas League, and I spent 3 years in the Texas League. I thought I was never going to get out of the Texas League, but fortunately I did, and ended up in the International League. I was there for 3 years. One week in was August. We had a scout from the American League that was down watching us work for a week, and he came in on Sunday. We didn't even know he was in the stadium, but he came in on Sunday and talked to us about our work and everything. And I said, well, can you give us any hint, can you tell us something that would help our work? And he said, no, Don, he said, you do a good job, don't worry about it. And then he talked to the other 2 umpires, and about 2 days later, I got a call from my supervisor and said that the American League had just purchased my contract. Now, it had to be probably the happiest day of my life to know that I was going to get a chance to officiate on the big league level. But it just, you just don't know what it is that when you go out there and process of elimination, of doing the job, calling balls and strikes, doing the work on the bases. And anyway, it was pretty exciting. I went to spring training in 1969. That was my first year, and from then on, I ended up, working with different crew chiefs and doing, doing the job the best of your ability. And you got to set goals. When you're out trying to achieve a level of your occupation. And I know in the minor leagues I set goals, and the goals were to get the hell out of those towns and get to a higher classification because it had to be a lot better than where I was. But I'll never forget my first game in the big leagues. We were out in Seattle, and I was working with a gentleman. They called him Gentleman John Flaherty. He'd been in the major leagues about, I'm going to say 15, 20 years, and what a nice man he was. And I can remember the day like it was yesterday. I was sitting there, and we as umpires have to sit down and rub the baseballs down to take the shine off. And it comes from a tributary of the Delaware River, this mud, and they send it to each ballpark in the major leagues. Now, that just doesn't seem right, but that is exactly what they do. So I'm sitting there, my hand in the mud, and I'm taking the shine off these baseballs, and John Flaherty came into the room and he said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm doing fine." I said, "I'm a little bit nervous about my next assignment." He said, "Why?" He said, "You worked 9 years in the minor leagues, you've been in spring training with the big leagues for 2 or 3 years. Why would you be nervous?" I said, "Well, I just am." He said, "Don, look at it this way. Timing is really important when you call balls and strikes. Don't call them too quick. Make sure that they come down, they come in and they hit the glove before you make a decision on what it is." He said, then, he said, "You got a 50-50 chance of being right." That's not a very good odds for that profession, believe me. But, we got to meet a lot of ball players. Now, I've been retired a little over 15 years now. I retired in 1998, then I supervised for 1 year after that. That's another story I won't get into, but we had the Reggie Jacksons and Armin Killebrews and Piniella and Roger Clemens, and they were great to work with, believe me, and some were a little more fun than others. We had Carl Yastrzemski. He had just won the Triple Crown in 1968, and so I thought, whoa, this guy's a real good athlete, must be a nice guy. And I was in Boston, and I called a pitch on him, and he stepped out and called me just about everything other than an umpire. And I said, well, we can't put up with this. So I ejected him, and I just never could get along with him. Now, you don't see him every day, but, in the course of a year, you're going to see him 10, 12 times or what have you. It depends on how the schedule runs, but it just seemed like for the first 7 years that I was in the big leagues, I had to eject him. We just didn't see eye to eye. And now it's the 8th year, and we were in Detroit, and I called a third strike, and he didn't like it, and he was playing third base for the Red Sox, and went down to third base and started screaming from down there, so I ejected him again. I said, someday he's going to learn. I know he is. So it was a couple of years later. He was now playing first base. He was at the tail end of his career, and I'm working first base in Fenway Park, and he said to me, how long have you been in the league? I said, I guess I've been here 10 years or so. He said, I've been watching you work. He said, you're really good. Now, I wasn't stupid. And he's telling me I'm good? Well, I didn't say anything, and he said, yeah, he said, you're really good. And mess this up big time here in a minute. Anyway, he said, I said, well, I'll go down there. And he said, well, you said you're the second best umpire, I think, in the American League. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. And then the ending ended, and he left, and he came back out, and of course it just kept bothering me that I was number 2, who was number 1, you know. So I said, Carl, everybody else called him Yaz, I couldn't do it. I said, Carl, if I'm number 2, who's number 1? He said, oh, the rest of them are tied for first. Of course, we have managers also, and they're all different. They all need to be handled differently. I mean, there are certain rules we go by. If you want to get yourself ejected from a ball game, call me something. Just use you. You are such and such. You are such and such. That will get you ejected immediately. But if you want to talk about the play, you can call that play anything you want. And that's not going to bother me. I had a manager one time came out to first base, and he said, you know, you can wear that uniform on What's My Line and stump the panel. I lived with the strike zone from the day I started umpiring till the day I quit, and the strike zone wasn't something you could, you know, say. The book said it was from your armpits to the top of your knees. But every umpire has their own strike zone. When they go out to work, they call balls and strikes the way they think they should be called. So Joe Gargiola came into our dressing room for Saturday game of the week, and he said, Don, he said, would you mind coming on the air and explaining where the strike zone is? I said, no, I wouldn't have any problem doing that. I said, but I'll tell you right now where I think the strike zone is, and then you tell me whether you want me on your television program or not. I said, the strike zone is that area over home plate where you get the least amount of arguments. It's that area over home plate where you get the least amount of complaints. Oh, he said. I thought it was the armpits at the top of the knees, and I said, well, you know, if we called from the armpits to the top of the knees, we'd get run out of town because the players would just keep getting ejected. And he said, well, he said, let's not worry about it. I said, okay. But Earl Weaver, I want to talk a little bit about Earl Weaver. He's such a great, nice, super guy. He couldn't seem to keep himself in a ball game to save his life. One day we're out there and he's got a biff with the home plate umpire, and so he comes out and he hangs around and he hangs around and he does, you know, and so finally the umpire goes out to the pitcher's mound to get him out of there, and he said something to the home plate umpire. He ejected him, and so then Earl came to me and he said, you know, you guys are ridiculous. Have you ever seen yourself eject anybody? I said, no, but I've seen a lot of other umpires eject people. And he said, well, let me show you what it looks like to be ejected. Now, this is during a ball game. He runs down to first base and throws the first base umpire out. Runs down to second base, throws him out. Runs down to third base where I am. I said, Earl, will you just get the hell out of here? And he said, I will, just as soon as I eject you. So then he threw me out. But he had a little drinking problem. And it's not because I drank with him to find that out. But I can read, and I read the paper where you kick the cop car at 3 o'clock in the morning, kick the side of the cop car, and things like that. So I knew he had some kind of a problem. So he said, now look, he said, if it ever gets to a point where you need a place to stay, you can stay at my house. I said, oh, that's interesting. Well, lo and behold, about 4 years later, I was in Washington, D.C. at a banquet, and they canceled my flight, and I thought, well, I wonder if I could get a hold of Earl and stay at his house. And I said, well, I got the address, I'll just drive over there. So I drive over to Earl's house, and I let the car run, and windshield wipers were going, and I knocked on the door, and this lady came to the door, and I said, does Earl Weaver live here? And she looked out and saw the car with the windshield wipers going, and she said, yeah, bring him on in. You know, I had a family, or I have a family, I have 3 daughters, and that was probably the toughest part of the job, is being gone all the time. You're on the road. When I started, we didn't even have vacations, and you only work 6 months a year. Why would you need a vacation? But we didn't have weekends off like you teachers, you know. So anyway, we're in New York, and Ralph Houk is the manager of the New York Yankees, and I'm working with a Hall of Famer, Nestor Shylock, and we're getting ready to work a Sunday afternoon game, fly back to Iowa so I can see my family. I'm going to Anaheim on Tuesday, and I'm going to have all day Monday at home, and we look forward to those days. So anyway, I'm working second base, and it's Vital Blue Day, and they're honoring Vital Blue, and if your last name is Blue, or you got a blue shirt on or something, you got a reduced price for your ticket. So they had a full house at Yankee Stadium. I was at second base. You know, that's the best place to be, at second base at Yankee Stadium, because they cannot throw bananas and those things that far. So anyway, I'm out there and thinking about going home and seeing my family, and next thing I know, the ball was hit the shortstop, and he flipped it over to Dick Green, and I called him out, and he threw to first base, and they called him out, and all of a sudden I hear all this screaming and yelling, and unbeknownst to me, Dick Green had dropped the ball at second base, and I didn't know it, and I called him out. We didn't have replays, we didn't have any way of getting out of it, you know, and none of the other umpires thought that they saw it well enough. And so Dick Hauser was a third base coach. He come running out, and we don't let them come running out on the field, otherwise they'd be out there all the time. And so I ejected him, and then I looked up, and Ralph Houk was standing about from here to this light, and he was running some names by me that I never heard in the Army, believe me. And so, of course, I ejected him, and Elston Howard had to literally come out and drag him off the field. And I'm thinking, boy, this is a great afternoon. But I still knew I was going to go home and see my family. So after the game is over, I had 4 ejections, and we always sit down and talk about those things, and how they happened and why they happened, and sometimes we get the replays, but because we were all catching a plane, we said, well, we'll go over it in Anaheim when we get out there. And so everybody left the dressing room, and we all got to LaGuardia and got our flights, and I'm flying to Minnesota and then down to Waterloo. And American League is really good. They let us fly first class and sit up front there, and you get a couple of libations, and you know, you never know who you're going to sit next to, you know. But this gentleman next to me was one of the finest guys I'd ever met, and he said he was just having a great day. And I said, oh, that's terrific, what'd you do? And he said, well, I mowed the lawn. He said, then I went in and watched the baseball game. And I started to think, well, maybe this is not where I want to go. And I said, oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. Yeah, he said they had the biggest argument you ever saw. I said, oh, did they? I said, well, tell me about it. He said, oh, you know, he said they dress up those, they get a guy off the road, put a uniform on him, and send him out to second base to umpire. Has no idea what he's doing. I said, at that time I had an all-star ring, and I just literally rolled it over on my finger. I didn't want him to read anything on it. And now we're in Chicago. We're getting off the plane, and I reached my pocket and I had a business card, and he was about 2 guys in front of me, and I tapped him on my shoulder and said, oh, by the way, it was a nice conversation. Here's my business card in case you ever get a chance to look me up. And he looked at that. He didn't move. And he started scratching his head. And then he just turned around and walked away. It's just like you don't go and get a haircut and tell everybody what you do for a living. Because it's not a wise idea, believe me. Now, I want to let you ask a couple questions if you have any. I could talk all night. But the best part of the job, I guess, is being able to meet the people that you run across throughout the United States and are associated with in the game. Majority are terrific people. I had a wonderful career. I couldn't have done any more that I can imagine. I was a crew chief for 23 years. It's something that you have to be selected by the league office, and so it was a great job. Now, let's talk about the World Series. I know all you Cardinal fans are just waiting to find out what happened. And those that don't know about the 1985 World Series, I was the umpire in chief, and I had to play at first base in the 6th game, and it was a play that I wish I could get back, or it's a play that I wish they had replay, but they didn't. I called a runner safe. He eventually did not score, but the Royals did score. The Kansas City Royals did score in that half inning and went ahead and tied up the series. So consequently, they had to go to the 7th game of the World Series. And now I would have to be the one behind the plate to officiate the 7th game. And it was very unpleasant to know, I didn't know, even when I came off the field, I didn't know I'd missed the play. And I got to the umpire room, and Peter Ubroff, the commissioner, was standing there, and I said, did I get the play right? And he said, no, you didn't. Well, that gives you really a sick feeling. And there's no room for error in that job at that level. And that doesn't mean they're not made, because we're only human beings, and we're going to make mistakes. But, and I made one, and it was what the Cardinals called a call that cheated them out of a World Series. I had probably over 200 letters from throughout the United States were Cardinal fans. I don't know if I got any Royal fan letters or not. I can't remember any. But and some of them were rather mean. And there is no retaliation when you get something in the mail. It is what it is, and if you choose to read it, go ahead. So anyway, now that was the 6th game, and now we're in the final game, and I'm behind the plate, and they're getting the Cardinals are getting beat by about 6 or 7 points, and they got a guy on the mound by the name of Joaquin Andahar, and I guess he didn't want to be there, because when I looked out after calling a pitch, he had both arms in the air, and we don't let them show us up. We just don't tolerate that by throwing their arms up in the air and discussing the pitch. So I headed to the mound. And about halfway out there, Whitey Herzog, the manager of the Cardinals, stopped me and said, where are you going? I said, I'm going out to tell him if he puts his arms up one more time, he's gone. And he looked at me and he said, if you got the play right last night, we wouldn't have to be here. I said, if you guys were hitting better than 122, we wouldn't have to be here either. And then he called me something I can't tell you. But he was ejected. And so I said, you gotta go? And he said, well, let me talk to Joaquin. He listens to me. So he went out and talked to Joaquin, and I don't know what he told him. But Joaquin threw another pitch, and he was ejected because he had his arms in the air again. So anyway, that's kind of the way it went. And then from that, I got all the letters. And then about 2 years after that World Series, I got a postcard that was never canceled. It was sent to my home in Waterloo, and it said, I know where you go, and I know what you do, and when I point my .357 Magnum at you, I'll just blow you away. Now that's serious. And I went to the post office, I said, where'd this come from? And they said, we don't know, because it wasn't canceled. I said, well, why isn't it canceled? And he said, well, they don't cancel a lot of the postcards because you can't use them again. Because once you write on them and send them, that's as far as they go. I said, okay. So then I got a hold of baseball security, and they got a hold of the FBI, and 2 FBI agents came to my house and wanted to know if I had any correspondence from anybody that would match this postcard that by that time they had. And I said, oh, I don't know. He said, well, you do have some letters. I said, I do. And I went on the garage and I got this big cardboard box and dropped it on my couch, and I said, there you go. And he said, oh, no. He said, do you have anybody that sticks out in your mind that you could say could have possibly done this? And I said, well, there was a guy that owned a construction company down there that had called me on the phone, called me everything under the sun, and then he called me back and apologized and said he was sorry, and then he sent me a letter that told me what a jerk I was. So I said, he's one, and he said, well, you got those letters? And so I gave them to him, and he looked at the letters and at his partner and said, okay, let's go. I said, wait a minute, how do you know that quickly who it is? And he said, well, look at this, these letters. At that time I owned a restaurant in Waterloo, and he misspelled restaurant on all correspondence, including the postcard. He had misspelled it, and they knew right away who it was, and they went to St. Louis and knocked on his door and said, if you bother down Denkinger anymore, you'll be in jail for a while. And I never heard from him since. So, but anyway, I'm going to let you ask a couple questions if you have any. Yes?
Who was your favorite player? Who would you give a lot of good calls to?
I got the first part, but I missed the second part.
Who did you maybe give a good call to every now and again?
Well, I don't think you can get very far if you gave calls away. You know, there's a lot of ball players I really liked. I mean, they're gentlemen. I don't think I've ever worked a game in Kansas City that George Brett didn't come in the dressing room and say, who's my favorite umpire tonight? It was always a guy behind the plate, you know, he switched every night, but he was just a lot of fun to be around, and, you know, but to give him, he didn't need anything. I mean, this guy could hit, Rod Peru, I mean, unbelievable hitters. They could fall out of bed and hit singles at least. Any other questions? Yes?
Were you ever involved in any of the baseball strikes?
Yes, all of them. I think from the time that we got Richie Phillips, our attorney, and he was there, I was there his entire career as an attorney, and I think we were on 3 or 4 strikes, walkouts, because they didn't want to pay us. And they wanted to give the players more and more, and it got to a point where a player was sitting on a bench making $1 million, and the highest priced umpire was making $300. Now, I know he was a lot more valuable to them than I was, but still, you know, we felt like we should have an equal share, percentage-wise. But the game's different now, completely different. Now they got instant replay. Nobody's going to make any mistakes. I don't know if that's good or bad. lot of them say they don't like it anymore because they can't yell at the umpires. You know, because you go out there and if a manager wants to wants to have a review of the play, he wants to wait and make sure that his video man tells him whether he should have them redo the play. And what that does, it delays the game. You know, they thought just because you got one time to complain about a play and then they review it, that would be, you know, all they get. Well, that's all they're going to get for 6 innings, so they don't want to waste them in case, you know, that they'd be able to use it the first 6 innings. So I don't know, and now I don't even know what the play is at home plate, what they're trying to stay away from. I guess they're trying to stay away from people getting broken legs and what have you. That always seems to be a big part of baseball, the collision at home plate. I've seen some good ones, some real good ones. Anyway, well, listen, thank you, good luck. I see all the students are going, that's good. I'm sure they're home in bed. Anyway, thank you very much.